for VCE Ag Today on this Thursday morning, April 30th, 2020. We'll go ahead and get started. We're pleased today to have Dr. David Holzhauser, Extension Soybean Agronomist for Virginia Cooperative Extension with us. And David's going to be speaking on some early season soybean management. So we're fortunate to have David this morning and thank him for joining us. Thank you all who are joining us this morning for your participation and time coming in to spend this morning with us. Just a few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. We have muted everyone, and for security reasons, we've had some issues. I know there's been a couple of sessions where there have been some issues with folks getting in that have been unwelcomed and caused some problems. So we've put some things into place on this now that hopefully will help that some. So if that does occur, we're going to attempt to fix that as quickly and as swiftly as possible. But in the event that the meeting does become compromised, we will end the meeting promptly to avoid any of those unwanted comments or disturbing remarks. So just be patient with us on that. If we do end the meeting, we'll contact everyone via email and let you all know how we'll get this information out. But we just wanted to make everyone aware of that in the event that something does happen and we are forced to take those measures. The other comment that I will make is, if you do have questions or comments, please save those until the end of the presentation once David finishes speaking. Once he's finished the presentation, we will open the floor up to questions and comments to hopefully facilitate a little bit of discussion, but that just try to, save those comments or write them down if possible, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. So Laura, Stephanie, Mike, Trent, anything you know of that I'm missing this morning before we get started?
I think you covered it all, Robbie.
All right. Well, we thank everyone for joining us again, and we'll turn it over to Dr. David Holzhauser, Extension Soybean Agronomist. David, thank you for joining us this morning.
Well, thank you, Robbie, and I want to say thank you to you and all the other agents for putting this together during these unusual times we had. I guess first thing I'd like to do is let's just go ahead and share my screen. Let me see if I can figure that out. Okay, Laura, am I able to share the screen?
I'm trying.
My screen? Yeah. Okay, well, maybe the security measures that you put in place were not allowing that. I was given quite a...
So hover your mouse, and do you see the bar pop up that says Manage Participants, Chat, and Share Screen?
Yes.
Okay, so go to the share screen.
Yeah.
And then share your screen now.
Stop others sharing screen. Okay, I was a little confused by what I was seeing there. Okay, how's this? You see something now on my screen?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I was giving quite a, pretty good list on the, see if I can minimize this, giving quite a list on what things I could talk about in early season soybean management. We'll try to get through most of those today. I'm not going to go into detail on any of these. What I'd rather do is just kind of introduce the subject and then maybe take time towards the end and we can have more of a question answer session. And I think it'd be more beneficial to all of us if we would do that. So first of all, I want to talk about these current cool weather conditions because they're first of all very different than what we had last year, if nothing else. And then let's talk about maturity group selection. And anytime you talk about maturity group selection, you need to talk about planting dates. Then we'll move into some seed treatments, nematode management decisions that you can still make now. and then we'll just move forward from there. Hopefully everybody's seeing what I'm looking at. I pulled this up yesterday off of a weather service, and this is showing on the left the GFS model and on the right the European weather model. Now, keep in mind, these are long-term forecasts, so they're speculative in nature. This takes us through next week. The thing that you will notice in both models, this is the temperature anomaly below normal. We are much cooler than average, and both models are showing that. The GPS is even showing us to be a little more cooler than normal. Now let's take this on out for the next, another 15 days. So this takes us into, let's see, the date on this is May 14th. So the next 2 weeks, this, if anything, this is deepened from normal. Now keep in mind, this isn't necessarily showing cold weather. This is just showing temperature anomalies over average. So now contrast that to what we saw last year this time. These were the first 2 weeks of temperatures that we had last year. I and others are the same way. We tend to only remember last year. We had a little rain in April. I know we couldn't get in late April and do some planting, but then May ended up being a pretty good planting season for most of the state. We had some warm temperatures and the soybean were popping right out of the ground. But if we're looking at something like this, for the next 2 weeks, there's some precautions that we are going to have to take, okay? And this is the first thing we need to look at. If these temperatures are low, and let me get back up a little. This is I've been following soil temperatures, and we seem to be in a monthly pattern. It seems like we've got a warm period and then a cold period, warm period and cold period. And at least the weather folks I'm following are saying that if this keeps up, we are going to come out of this cold period. We just don't know when. If it's going to be a week, it's going to be 2 weeks, or maybe 3 weeks. And I looked at soil temperatures, but in late March and early April, we had some very warm soil temperatures throughout the state. And I was thinking, wow, we ought to get out and plant some beans. And we may have done so ourselves if we'd had all of our seed in. And I imagine those beans came up. I actually saw some soybeans up and growing not long ago from someone that put in an early planting. But now I think the things are going to be much different. This is our problem. Seedling damping off, you can get some fusarium, pythium, phytophthora, other things that could be causing us a situation. Therefore, when we're talking about something like this, we need to make sure that we get a seed treatment on these seed. I had a call just 2 days ago from a southeastern farmer, and he asked, hey, it's going to be warm tomorrow, and I was thinking about putting some late 4 soybean in. I want to put them in early and try to take advantage of the long days and etc. I said, well, first of all, I explained the situation we're just now talking about. And I said, it's going to get cold and these seed are going to be in the ground. And this guy's a cotton and peanut farmer. I said, do you really want to be harvesting beans the 1st of, October? And he said, well, probably not. I'll be in the peanut and cotton harvest then. So we just need to keep these in mind. But I'm not saying don't plant. I'm just saying if you do plant, make sure you've got a good fungicide seed treatment on that crop. The other disease I will mention, this is a late season disease, sudden death syndrome, that we're seeing more and more of each year. This will appear in August, even into September, but the infection's occurring now. Usually, this is very highly correlated to early planting. And I think that's largely due to the same situation. If the seed is in the ground for very long, the disease are in the ground, they're going to have more of an opportunity to attack that plant. Therefore, you've got to have you got to protect that plant. Now, up until a couple of years ago, we didn't have any treatments for sudden death syndrome as far as a seed treatment. We now have a pretty good one. But I will say something about this disease. I've always said it's really not that bad of a disease. Sometimes I felt like they should have called it seldom death syndrome if that's all you've got, but it's a really good indicator that you've got nematode problems. So anytime I see this disease late in the season, I'm sampling for nematode. Now, again, I'm not telling you not to plant, but one thing I'm not encouraging you to get in a big hurry with planting either just because of what I've described. The seed's going to be in the ground, 7, 10 more days before it comes out. You're more likely to get attacked by disease. This is a planting date chart that I use over and over. It's a theoretical chart, but it pretty much tells what soybean yield does with planting date. This is 100% of the maximum yield. We really get very little yield loss up and through about the first week of June. Matter of fact, my data shows this curve is flat. It's very flat. Now, keep in mind, if you plant 30 days earlier, you're going to gain about 10 days in maturity. And this is where I want to talk about these maturity groups. If you go from, say, a group 5 to a 4, or from a group 4 to a 3, you're going to gain another 10 days. And that's the idea behind this early soybean production system. If you grow an early maturing variety and plant it, say, in April, which we're past that date now, then you could gain up to 20 days. But think about this. If you're rain fed and you're not under perfect conditions, not under irrigation, do you really want to move that critical seed and pod development to the hotter and drier time of the summer? Instead of late August, now moving it to the early August. That's generally not a great idea, and that's generally why I see that these early plantings, I've seen no big advantage in Virginia. And the maturity group goes with that as well. However, I will say, and what I've seen over and over again, is that on your better soils, on areas you're irrigating, the earlier maturity groups work better and earlier planting dates work better. And my recommendation is plant your early maturing varieties. If it's an early 4 or even a late 4 versus a 5, plant those first, spread out those maturities over time, and therefore you're more likely to avoid that drought stress. Let's look at some of these seed treatments with that said. So first of all, we've got some cool conditions. It's going to take a while for these beans to come up. But you don't need to get in a big hurry with planting. Yield-wise, I see very little difference in planting now versus the middle of May, and quite honestly, through the mid-1st of June. But if you do decide to go, think about what seed treatments you got. The main diseases we're going to look at is Rhizoctonia and Fusarium. So think about this, and I can provide this data later on, maybe even put it on our pest and crop management blog today. Shows which seed treatments are the best for these diseases. We do occasionally have Pythium. That's one of the water molds, and you'll need these products here. And that's the Apron products. I will mention this sudden death syndrome again. We noticed that none of these seed treatments I've shown you here are effective against sudden death syndrome. I mentioned we do have a new one, and that one's called Elevo. That is good for sudden death syndrome. However, and I can put this chart up as well, that gives you more details. Dr. Hillary Mell put this and the last chart together. The Elevo treatment does work on sudden death syndrome, but again, I point out, if you've had an issue with sudden death syndrome, then nematodes may be your big problem. Now, with that said, let's talk a little about nematode management. And I want to thank Keith Balderson for this picture. I have used this photograph over and over and over again to demonstrate that even with a resistant variety, we're not going to yield much with that soybean versus a multiple race resistant variety. But basically, my big 3 for nematode management is, first of all, cultural practices. If you're doing tillage, you got to clean that equipment before you move from a nematode field into a non-nematode field. Rotation is number 1. Soybean on soybean, you're asking for trouble there, especially if you do that more than 2 or 3 years. And with the prices today, I don't know if that's the issue anymore. Variety selection, we can select some nematode resistant varieties, whether they're cyst nematode or root knot nematodes. And we do have a couple of nematicide seed treatments that are somewhat effective now. Now, let me say something about that. Again, this is Dr. Hillary Mel's data over the last, I want to say 4 or 5 years. She summarized this together. This is all the nematodes together. So I'm not showing you the details, root knot and soybean cyst, but you can see our various nematicide seed treatments. I guess the one that kind of stands out is the Avicta. Let me describe what I'm showing here. This X is the average yield response that she has seen under nematode infested fields with Avicta. Now, this isn't that great of a yield response, but keep in mind this is a seed treatment. It's only a protectant. We're really not getting rid of the nematode. This represents 2/3 of the data. And this line up here is a median. In other words, in over half of her plots, we've got a 5 bushel yield increase from the Avicta. And then this is the range we get. So you don't always get a yield increase, even where you got nematodes and so forth. Some of these are biologicals. There's the Alivo. I mentioned it's good for sudden death syndrome, but it also has some nematicide activity. Poncho Votivo is one that I know the agents have looked at a lot. Those are the other ones that is generally on average giving you about a 2 bushel yield increase, not a large one, and the median's up there as well. So keep these in mind. I think we would suggest that if you know you have nematodes, then I would suggest using one of these seed treatments as well as a fungicide seed treatment. And let me say one more thing about seed treatments. Our entomologists in Virginia, North Carolina, Maryland, and Delaware have never shown a yield response from an insecticide seed treatment. That doesn't mean that you don't have a situation where they will work. Okay, I'm not saying that you'll never get a response from it, but I'm saying in the data they've collected over the years and years of work since we've had these, they haven't shown that. But again, the nematicide and fungicides, these are worthwhile. I'll say something briefly about inoculants. Inoculants are a good product. They are a rhizobia bacteria that soybean needs to create nitrogen, which is the nutrient it needs the most. The main thing with getting good nodulation, these are the little nodules on the roots though, is keeping your pH where you need to be. And I need to change this to 6.5. But keeping that in a good level because it doesn't like acidic soils. My recommendation's always been inoculate the beans if you haven't grown them in the past 3 years. My test on rotated beans have not shown any yield response to that. And I'll just leave it at that. However, where we've grown soybean on new land, we do see the yield response, even that second time soybean has been grown on new land. In other words, we've grown it 1 year, inoculated it, maybe rotated the corn, then went back with beans. We've shown the inoculant to be valuable there too, but generally not in historically long rotated fields. Finally, I'll leave you with this, and we can move. This is a good stopping place, I believe. You know, they mentioned this topic. I think Trent gave me this, crop fertility and management. And again, the inoculants thing we need to think about now. But it's, you know, in my opinion, it's never too late to put fertilizer or lime on a field, even though it takes lime a long time to activate, or to even soil test. We really need to know what we need before we start putting things on. Tissue sampling is important for diagnostics, but I will stress these tissue sample levels, these sufficiency ranges were created for diagnosing issues and problems, not necessarily for determining what your crop needs at that time. So, and I'm going to leave that open. What else do we want to talk about? So, there's my contact information. That's my mobile phone and email. Please feel free to give me a call anytime, and I'll make myself available. So, do we want to open up the mics now for questions?
Hey, thanks, David. We really appreciate you sharing that presentation and that good information this morning. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, I guess we can go ahead and open it up for some questions. I have gone in and allowed everyone the capacity to write questions in the chat box. So if you're on with us via a laptop or desktop this morning, if you have questions, if you could type those in the chat, we'll read those as we see them pop up and facilitate that discussion with David. And then also I'm going to go in and allow you all to unmute yourselves. So if you have a question, you can just speak up. So just give me just a second here to do that.
Should I stop sharing, or you want my information up?
All right, so I believe now you do have the capacity to unmute yourself. So if you see on your screen there where it says unmute, if you have a question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask that question or type it in the chat box. If we don't get any questions here in a short spell, I'll just go ahead and unmute everyone. I just asked that if you're somewhere where it's a little bit noisy or there's some background noise, if you could just quickly mute yourself again once I unmute you to kind of avoid some of that congestion on here. Any questions for David?
Hey, Robbie, this is Mike. I got one for David.
Yes, sir, Mike, go ahead.
David, a few slides back where you were describing the MG3, 4, and 5 in the planning dates.
Yes.
I missed something there, and I'm sure you went over that. Just this only thing I missed was a really good presentation. I've got some farmers who've already, of course, they've already taken delivery, paid for, say a 5-1. They don't want to plant. They can't plant now. It's just too wet.
Right.
Can you reinterpret that for me? I mean, are they good to take a MG5 and plant at? Is that what you're saying, that they should be planting about the 1st of June with that being?
Well, Mike, I'm not saying they should plant on the 1st of June. I'm saying with our let's say late 4, early 5. I've seen my best response to those varieties in April, May, and even into June. Those are our adapted varieties. Those are the ones that consistently perform well with us. So I'm very good with using a early 5. Planting through the 1st of June, it's hard to say when we're going to get that rapid yield loss. It varies from year to year. It depends on the amount of growth that we get on the soybean. But yes, a group 5 is fine. I guess my point was I've not seen an advantage to planting in April versus May or early May versus late May. With hardly any of our maturity groups, if there's anything I've seen in my data is that the group 3s, now this would be planting a maturity group probably out of the usual for this area, or an early 4 in April doesn't do as well as if you plant them in May. But I have seen the late 4s and early 5s do well in April, May, even into early June.
Okay, so good advice. I mean, like I say, they can't get in the field right now, and
Right.
the grounds is look like, as you said with your weather maps, it looks like the next maybe 2 weeks could be temperatures lower than normal.
And keep in mind, that's purely speculative. I think at least for through next week, it's going to be cool, but we're not going to be able to get it back into the field until maybe middle of next week if nothing else happens after today and tomorrow.
I understand.
So we're good. And the main thing I wanted to emphasize here is don't get in a big hurry. Now, you know how many acres you have to plant. So that's the most important. I want to see everything planted by June 1, okay? At the latest.
I got you. Okay. Yeah, they want to hold off with some of these late 4s and early 5s. They want to hold off, but they're scared that frost is going to catch them. And anyways, they don't want to plant in damp, wet ground. But you're thinking they can wait until, you know, and get them in by June 1.
Yeah, yeah. If you've got some earlier varieties, those are the ones I put in first, once again.
I got you. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments for David this morning?
Robbie,
Yes, sir, Mike.
I would like just to say David made an exceptionally well presentation today. Anytime I only have one question, that's pretty good. But David, thank you very much. That was very well received and very good presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead, Mike, because I'm not sure. There may be some folks joining us via cell phone or landline this morning, and I think it's a little bit different for them to unmute themselves. So I'm going to just go ahead and unmute everybody for just a short spell here and make another call for questions before we finish up this morning. All right. For those of you via phone, everyone should be unmuted at this time. So is there any last questions for David this morning?
4 cartons of ice cream. And I don't mean the pints. I mean.
All right. Well, as Mike said, David, I just checked the chat window here and I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Yes, go ahead.
Hey, Rob, it's Barry. I'll just say I know not many of us are still drilling beans, but in the conditions they're forecasting, would say a 4.7, 4.9. Do they have any research on what is the best planting population on for your best shot at the best averages, I guess, with today's beans, if you're drilling instead of doing 15-inch rows?
Yeah, let me say something about that. All of our seeding rate work that we've done up until this time, and we've restarted that over the last 3 years in a lot of locations. Basically, I would suggest 100 to 120,000 seed per acre right now. If you're drilling, I want to go towards the upper end of that just because it's the way drill places seed. We don't get a good uniform placement of that seed. If you, on 15-inch rows though, I'm not afraid to go even 95,000 or less. I mean, our data shows that we can go fairly low as long as I've got 70,000 plants up, or I'll say 80,000 plants up to give us a little window of opportunity per acre. That's enough under most situations. Now, one caveat I will put on this is on our poorest land, on our traditionally lower yielding land, then I need those greater seeding rates. And it's just opposite of corn. You know, if you think you don't want to plant soybean like you plant corn, and for corn we increase our seeding rates on our best yielding land. On soybean you can actually decrease it, because all we're trying to do is fill those gaps in the field, capture as much light as we can capture. Once we do that, we've met all the qualifications for seeding rate. So I would say, yeah, 100 to 120,000 seed per acre is good. If you get an 80% germination, that'll still leave you 80 to 95,000 seed plants. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Let me now, if you, hopefully, if this weather conditions does stay up and you start reducing seeding rate, just to save a little money, make sure you've got a fungicide on at least in the next week or so. But watch the soil temperatures on these, because you can reduce stands. That's one thing we have seen with these fungicide seed treatments, is there is a stand reduction if you don't use them. Now that's one reason we don't see a lot of times we don't see a yield response, because we still have enough plants there to make yield.
Thank you, David. I see Mike added a link there in the chat box for those of you that are joining us and have the capacity to see that. It's a link to a publication that David has put together that has that information on recommended seating rates. So recommend you take a look at that. That'll provide some good information and recommendations based off of some of David's work. So if you can't see that link this morning, we'll post that with the video as well. And we'll also, have that available. So if you're joining by phone or something, just give your local agent a call or an email, and we'll be glad to share that with you. Any other questions for David this morning?
And one other thing I'll mention is our pest and crop management blog. This time of year, we're starting to update that weekly, and I'm sure if you go into that, and I've got some seeding rate things, more up-to-date information than what you'll see in the older publication. So but I would encourage you to follow that blog. If you sign up for an email, you'll get an email once every Friday and just give you a brief overview of what you'll see on that.
All right, well, I've checked the chat and I don't see any more comments or questions there. And it sounds like there are no more questions. So David, I guess we'll conclude this morning. I'd just like to thank Dr. David Holzhauser again for his time and joining us this morning. Thank you very much, David. I think you did an excellent job. Like Mike said, it's always a good thing when you do a presentation and have very few questions. So I appreciate all your time and information this morning. I also like to thank the team of extension agents that helped to make this possible. Stephanie Romelchek, Laura Maxey-Nay, Trent Jones, and Mike Broadus. And also thank you to all the other extension agents and extension personnel on the call this morning. We appreciate you joining us, and hope you find this program beneficial, and please share with your producers. That's what the purpose of this is. So please share with anyone that can find this information useful. We will be posting the recordings for this meeting. If you're joining us this morning, you'll see a link there to the recording. So if you go to that link, you should be able to find all past versions of VC Ag Today. So with that being said, thank you all again this morning. Please stay safe, stay healthy. If you have any questions regarding this topic or any previous topics that we've covered, or any other production questions you may have, please contact your local Virginia Cooperative Extension agent or specialist. We'll be glad to help with that. So thank you all again, and appreciate everyone joining us this morning. Thanks again, David.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having this.